Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Now in 2019, you're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. From executive producers Simon Kinberg and Jordan Peele comes the reimagining of a worldwide phenomenon, the all-new Twilight Zone.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. This is Douglas Viviani. We're sans David Cohen today because we've got a special guest that will be our special co-host. David is off at a convention today, so we will excuse his not appearing with us. But we have a special guest that obviously has something to do with the Twilight Zone and more. He's been on a show previously, and in the 60th anniversary this year of the Twilight Zone, it's quite effective, I would think, to have this special guest here even more times than not. This will be his third visit with us because the Twilight Zone is something that is near and dear to Rod Serling. And Rod Serling is the subject of a book that Nicholas Parisi has prepared and generated for us that is tremendous. The name of the book is Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination. Nicholas Parisi is here with us today. Nicholas is someone that is, what would you say? He's a Rod Serling aficionado. He also is going to be appearing at the SERLING FEST in 2019, which is now October 4th, 5th, and 6th in Binghamton. And, you know, for all the listeners in Ogdensburg who are listening to us on WQTK 92.7 FM on Sunday mornings at 8 a.m., get up early, get out. It's about a 3-hour drive to Binghamton, but you can stay overnight. It's worth it. This convention is 3 days long. It's well worth it. We'll be talking about that and more with Nicholas Parisi, who serves on the board of directors of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to preserving and promoting Rod Serling's legacy. He's also a former staff writer and editor for the Good Times magazine here on Long Island, and it is a pleasure to welcome Nicholas Parisi again to Everything Old is New Again. Nicholas, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be back again.
That's good to hear. We've covered a lot of material last time on, and if you're going to look or you want to look on the website to see our old show, numbers 252 and 253 on the web. You can go everythingoldisnewagain.biz and you will find those shows. Before we start talking about Rod Serling, the force behind the Twilight Zone, let's just jump into, because we just heard the introduction to the brand new Twilight Zone series that's on CBS All Access. Have you seen it? And if so, any thoughts about the reincarnation? The third now reincarnation.
Yeah, depending on how you count, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, I've watched the first 5 episodes, so it's a 10-episode season, so I'm exactly halfway through. I'm way behind. So I watched the first 5. I honestly, the 5 that I watched, there was one that I really liked a lot, one I really didn't like a lot, and the other 3 I thought were passable. Okay, so not quite a great batting average so far, but from what I hear, there's some good things to come on the episodes that I haven't watched yet, so I still have my fingers crossed.
Let's hope. I think one of the issues to me with that show, of course, Rod Serling didn't write them, and his compadres, he had a great writing staff of the original show, are not around, of course, to write these. They're not redoing old episodes. That's good. But they went, I think all of them are in the range of an hour, anywhere from 35 to 50 minutes, 55 minutes long. And when the Twilight Zone did that, I think in their 4th season, you tell me, I don't think they had the success quality-wise or even ratings that back in the 60s the original show had when it was a half hour. You tell me.
Yeah, I think that the length is definitely a problem. I think the length is a problem in a lot of different ways. I think it could work at this at a longer length. I think it could. But the problem I find is, first of all, that as you said, the 5 episodes that I watched anyway, they vary in length. They could be 40 minutes, they could be 46 minutes, they could be an hour and 2 minutes. I mean, so they're all different different lengths, and I find that is not a great idea for several reasons. One is that you just don't get into a rhythm in the show. Even as a viewer, when you sit down to watch the show, you really don't know exactly what the show is going to be, how long it's going to last. I mean, and the original series, especially in that half hour, it had a rhythm. It had that opening teaser, opening scene teaser, and then Rod Serling would come in and introduce the show, and then you knew what the structure of the show was, and the twist at the end. Whereas these episodes, I mean, there are episodes where Jordan Peele doesn't even come in to do his introduction until 4 minutes into the episode or something, or 5-6 minutes into the episode, and it just doesn't feel right. It just loses a certain rhythm. Not only that, but I think that when the writers have that much freedom to just kind of write, however long the show the story should take, go ahead and take it. Well, it has a positive effect in that it gives them the freedom to create on a bigger canvas and all of that, but it also gives them the freedom to wander. And I found that a couple of the longer episodes, they just wandered into areas where they easily shouldn't have gone, I thought. And the episodes could easily be cut down, and just not cut down in terms of, just for length purposes, but cut down in terms of focus, to focus on what is the story here? What should we really be focusing on here? I think the best example of that from the episodes that I saw was, I guess it was the third episode with the alien who comes to the Christmas party, and he's in prison, and I thought that had the basis for a really good episode. I thought that was one of the okay ones. As I was saying, that was the three that I thought were okay, but I thought it totally lost its focus in certain story areas. I thought that, in terms of Jordan Peele's introduction to the show, I thought he was setting it up as the story of this one particular police officer who happened to be part Eskimo, Inuit, I guess, and I thought it was kind of her story, but it wasn't. It ended up being partly the brother's story, and and it just went off into too many different directions. So I think they would be well suited to, even if they were going to go for an hour, just stick with an hour. So
right.
Don't let it vary, and also not only that, but Rod Serling, when they did obviously they had commercials. This show does not have commercials, so the hour-long episodes of the Twilight Zone were really 46 minutes. Well, if they wanted to say, okay, this is a 45-minute show and that's it, I think they would be well served to do that, just in terms of focus and everything.
Plus,
else.
also as someone that's watching it, I don't know if it's subconscious or not, but when or you got it's a half-hour show, you have that built-in anticipation. It's like a birthday present. It's there, you're opening it, but the opening is fun, but that opening is ending pretty soon when you get to the present. Right. You don't know when that kick is going to come, and I know they want to probably focus on the surprise all the time, and maybe have the ending surprise you as how long it's going to be. But I think psychologically somehow that messes you up a little bit. It's sort of what you're saying, I guess.
Exactly right, yes.
Now let's talk about really quick, because we've got a few minutes here, and we'll get to it another section as well. This SERLING Fest, which is coming up very quickly in October 4th, 5th, and 6th. It's in Binghamton. Tell us a little bit about what it is and what the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation is that's hosting this event.
Yeah, well, this is very exciting. It's going to be the third such event that we're doing, and this year is the 60th anniversary. So we've expanded it this year, and we're going to be doing it in 3 days. So October 4th, 5th, and 6th in 3 different locations. So if you go to rodserling.com, you'll see the details. The schedule exactly is still being worked out, but it is going to be at those 3 different locations, and this is going to be a 3-day celebration of everything Twilight Zone-esque. There's going to be about 11 different authors there who have written books about the Twilight Zone or about Rod Serling, doing presentations and signings and author signings and things like that. And we're going to be screening episodes. Bill Mumy, the great star of 3 different episodes, he's going to be with us just on Skype for satellite interview live, so we'll be able to ask him questions, and a whole bunch of other Twilight Zone related events. So it's going to be a great time. coming up soon.
Great. And we'll get to Bill Mooney a little later on, too, talking about some of the individual episodes of The Twilight Zone and more. We're not just going to talk Twilight Zone, but that might be somewhat of our focus here, in that that's what most people remember Rod Serling for. However, he did so much more. If you take a look at this book that Nicholas Parisi has written, Rod Serling, his life, work, and imagination, it goes well beyond the Twilight Zone, and it's worth it. 541 pages long, and it is a great read. It's a lot of fun if you're a fan, and if you're not a fan, it will make you a fan. If you are a fan, it'll make you more of a fan, because you do go into all of the Twilight Zone episodes, but you do all the other works that he did, which we'll get into, but which is a lot of work and a lot of different projects. So in 15 seconds, how is it going with the book so far?
The book is going great, and the reception has been tremendous. Yeah, it really has been.
That's great, and we're going to continue talking about the book, about the Twilight Zone, about Rod Serling, about Serling Fest here on Everything Old is New Again, right after this, when we return after this commercial break.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone and Everything Old is New Again, a perfect combination, being that it's the 60th anniversary of the Twilight Zone. We have the perfect guest. Nicholas Parisi is here with us today, talking about, of course, his book, Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination. It's a tome dedicated to Rod Serling and all things Rod Serling that include the Twilight Zone, but Night Gallery, believe it or not, Planet of the Apes, and so much more. Requiem for a Heavyweight, so many things that Rod Serling did. And we'll be talking about that this episode and the next episode on Everything Old is New Again. Nicholas Parisi, that was the first season introduction of Twilight Zone. He changed the introductions. When and why did he change those?
Pretty much every season had a different introduction. I think the second and third kind of shared an introduction for a while or whatever, but there's four or five different ones in the 5 seasons. So so he changed them just for the sake of variety. He every season they wanted to have something a little bit new. Make the show look a little different. I mean, they had different, not just the voiceover, but different graphics and everything else. So yeah, that was the idea. They just wanted to change it up every season.
And he was a writer, so he wrote.
Yes. He had several introductions that weren't used. I mean, I don't know if I didn't use many of them in the book actually, but there I have 4 or 5 different introductions that he didn't use that were possible.
And the classic, everybody's used them. We'll talk about them down the line when we talk about Twilight Zone and pop culture. I picked out a few with some parodies and things which are pretty funny. Long story short, let's get into a particular episode or two here and talk about maybe the meaning behind these. It gives you a little bit of a look as to the kind of man that Rod Serling was, I think, when you see what he wrote, of course. So the first clip is from One for the Angels, and this is an episode, I think it was the second of the first season, where Rod Serling wrote it, starring Ed Wynn, if you're familiar with him. If you're not, when you see the episode, you will be. And Murray Hamilton, who was the mayor in Jaws. Listen closely.
Most persuasive pitch, Mr. Bookman.
Mr. Death,
excellent
that little
pitch.
girl's only 8 years old. Quite a pitch. Very effective. It's the best I've ever done. It's a kind of a pitch I always wanted to make. A big one. A pitch so big that the sky would open up.
Pitch for the Angel.
That's right, a pitch for the Angels.
Nicholas, you want to give us just a smidge on what the episode is about? Then I'll do the epilogue because I think it really tells.
Yeah. This is the second episode of the first season, as you mentioned. This basic story, actually dates back a long way for Rod Serling. This was 1959, but he actually wrote the original kind of draft of this story. It was called The Pitch. It was for a show called The Storm that he wrote in Cincinnati in 1951. And The Pitch was basically the same story, except it didn't have a supernatural element to it. What it was a story about a sidewalk pitchman who has an older brother who's become involved in organized crime. And the older brother is always picking on the younger brother. He's such a loser that he has to, be on the street selling these trinkets and, and what happens is that it turns out that the older brother has been skimming money from the mob and gets into trouble, and the brother has to do a pitch to keep a group of witnesses around his brother at all times, so that they wouldn't whack him if they were witnesses, this many witnesses. So he wants to give the biggest pitch he's ever given in his life to save his brother's life. And so Rod Serling, when he did the Twilight Zone, he did recycle a lot of ideas that he had earlier, and this was one of them. And he just added the supernatural element of bringing in Mr. Death and the death of the little girl. And it's the ideas that the Edwin character has to make this pitch to keep Death from visiting this little girl in time to take her, because otherwise she's she's going to die. And at the end, of course, well, if you want to give,
why not? I just because I couldn't find the clip of it, but I have it written out here from I just wanted to present it because it's so interesting. I won't do the Rod Serling affectation, but Louis J. Bookman, age 60ish, occupation pitchman, formerly a fixture of this summer, formerly a rather minor component to a hot July, but throughout his life, a man beloved by the children and therefore a most important man. Couldn't happen, you say? Probably not in most places, but it did happen in the Twilight Zone. Why is he saying, and what does that say about him, that he's saying someone that is beloved by children is a most important man?
Yeah, well, Rod Serling loved kids. Yeah, he really did. So, I mean, that was in the episode. That is obviously a big focus. That that this is a guy who Rod Serling describes Blue Bookman as a fixture of the neighborhood. He's like he's just kind of there. He's somebody who people don't even notice. He's just a guy. He's pitching and they just walk past him, but the kids love him. And that was the idea that somebody who seems insubstantial to the general person, he was very, very important to these kids, and that gave him stature.
Right, and an important man in our society for Rod Serling, and I think should be for all of us. Yeah. And of course, in the episode, you haven't seen it, he saves the children's life by giving a pitch to Death, who then misses the time to take the young lady and takes him instead. Yeah. How about Mr. Beavis? Let's take a listen to this. I think it's interesting juxtaposition.
In the parlance of the 20th century, this is an oddball. His name is James B.W. Beavis, and his taste leaned toward stuffed animals, zither music, professional football, Charles Dickens, moose heads, carnivals, dogs, children, and young ladies. Mr. Beavis is accident-prone, a little vague, a little discombobulated, with a life that possesses all the security of a floating crap game. But this can be said of our Mr. Beavis. Without him, without his warmth, without his kindness, the world would be a considerably poorer place.
So firstly, I think you could see that Serling had a tongue-in-cheeky. He could be lighthearted, still give you a message. Message is never something that's hit you over the head. But getting to the message of this particular episode, a gentleman that just lives life, forgets the mortgage, forgets bills. He lives and enjoys every moment of his day, and it may not lead him to success financially, but he might be success as a person.
Yeah, that's the entire point of this particular episode. And yeah, you hear Rod Serling's affection for this kind of character, that he's a character. Yeah, he's a character and he loves life. And as far as Rod Serling's concerned, the world would be a much not so great a place without the people like James B.W. Beavis, the oddballs.
The oddballs, the fun person, the person that doesn't follow the leader, so to speak, right? And I think from Rod Serling himself, an interview he did in 1959 with Mike Wallace tells you a little bit. He's talking here about the Velvet Alley, which is again Playhouse 90. Rod Serling wrote for as a show, of course, before the Twilight Zone. And Art Carney and Jack Klugman were in this episode, and he's talking about corruption of money versus what does life. What's life all about? What really does matter?
And because those become so large, what becomes small?
I think probably the really valuable things. And I know this sounds corny and sort of buckwheatish to say that things like having a family, being concerned with raising children, being concerned with where they go to school, being concerned with a good marital relationship, all these things I think are of the essence.
basic wholesome values were important to someone that maybe if you just look at the Twilight Zone and on the surface, you don't think this about this gentleman. Well, tell us about how that informed us.
Well, I mean, that did come through in the Twilight Zone, but it's not the thing that people think of first, that's for sure. When people think of the Twilight Zone, they just think of fantasy and, the twist endings and aliens and things like that. But anybody who's really watched the show in depth realizes that Rod Serling's philosophy just pours through all over the place. And one is, that money is not the most important thing in life. And as he said, that may sound cornball and everything else, but it's true. In that particular clip, he's talking about kind of the Hollywood. Mike Wallace was asking about moving to Hollywood and becoming kind of a star, wealthy and everything. And he's saying, well, that can take precedence, and all of a sudden you start neglecting those other things. In the Twilight Zone, it was more. He was talking about that the business, success in business is not, the most important thing. The more important thing is who you are. And in that particular episode, James B.W. Beavis, he has the opportunity to be quote unquote successful, but he has to give up all these things that were important to him. And he says, heck with it. I don't want to be successful. I'll keep my zither music and the broken down car, and same thing. He's very popular with the kids, and I'll keep that, and I'll just be who I am. And Rod Serling believed in that.
Do you think Rod Serling, in some ways, even though he had been through the war, he had difficult times with the sponsors and being censored in some of the things he wanted to write about, was basically a kid at heart?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, you go no further than reading Anne Serling's book. Anne Serling, his daughter, wrote a terrific memoir called As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling. And one of the things that she stresses in that book is how, first of all, how funny he was. He was a very, very funny guy in his personal life, and he loved to play practical jokes and that kind of thing. That was a big thing. And the other thing that she says that was pretty poignant is that that some people, a lot of people probably have trouble picturing their parents as kids. And she says she never had that problem with her father. She could very easily picture her father as an 8-year-old, and because he did have that spirit. He kept that kid-like, childlike spirit till the end.
I think that, and that's really, I think, some of the success, whether people realize it or not. When you look at the Twilight Zone and Night Gallery and other things that he wrote, there's quite a variety of serious versus lighthearted. But he wanted to, and we'll talk about this later. He'll tell us himself from his own words, wanted to have a meaning to all things that he did. He didn't just write for the heck of it. There was a meaning to things that he did, and this is the kind of discussion I think you're going to find when you attend SERLING FEST 2019, October 5th. Well, 4th, 5th, and 6th in Binghamton. Go to rodserling.com to find out the information. You can also go to Facebook, Dimensions of Imagination, and you can find out more information online about Rod Serling, his life, work, and imagination. The book by Nicholas Parisi on Amazon. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's really a lot of fun. And speaking of which, we'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New again to continue with the fun. Nicholas Parisi, talking all things Rod Serling.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything old is new again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
All this fatherly advice, and all the time you wanted her for yourself. What are you going to do, meet in San Francisco? And what else?
Nothing else. Now base that in your brain, unless you're looking for things to haunt you. Well, I am human. I'm life-sized. I'm no giant, no matter how big you once thought I was.
Do yourself a favor. Lead your own life. A man's life.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New again. That's Lloyd Bridges speaking the words of Rod Serling. The question is, where was that from? If you're a Twilight Zone fan, a Rod Serling fan, I don't know that you still even know the answer to that question, but we're hosting here on Everything Old is New again a gentleman that does know the answer to that question. The author of Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination, Nicholas Parisi. Also, he will be featured guest at the SERLING FEST in Binghamton, October 4th, 5th, and 6th. Go to rodserling.com to get information about that. If someone asked you, what show did Rod Serling do, if any, after the Twilight Zone, most people would say
Night Gallery.
Right. And what was the real answer?
The Loner.
Which was that what we just heard, right?
Yes.
I just want to read a smidge from the book, your book, page 294, about the loner, and then ask you to explain what this is. This was a show about a Civil War hero after the Civil War, trying to examine his life. But again, this is a Western. Let's listen to a little of the words of Rod Serling here. There is a distinct need in television for programming of quality, programs that, while they don't purport to be vehicles of social criticism, are nonetheless adult in scope. They have a point of view that may contain but not depend upon physical action. A thinking man's Western is what this was. Tell us what was going on and what was different about The Loner than what else was on TV at the time, and what it may have been a precursor to some of the things we see now.
Yeah, it's The Loner is a very interesting show and a very underrated show. It's a forgotten show, and it shouldn't be. It was finally released on DVD, about 4 years ago, I think, after 50 years of being completely lost. And The Loner followed up on the Twilight Zone almost immediately. The Loner debuted just about a little less than a year, I think, after the Twilight Zone ended. So it was really hot on the heels of the Twilight Zone, and Rod Serling had actually created it during the first season of the Twilight Zone. In 1960, he had written the pilot for The Loner, and of course he was busy with the Twilight Zone and couldn't actually do anything with it really, but it was picked up right after the Twilight Zone ended, and Rod Serling jumped with both feet into this series. He was, as you may know, he was less involved with the Twilight Zone in the 4th and 5th seasons than he had been in the first 3. So his voice is kind of, it's lessened in the 4th and 5th seasons of the Twilight Zone. And the remarkable thing that you find in The Loner is that when The Loner debuts, it's like, boom, it's like Rod Serling is back. It's like his voice is all over this thing. He wrote 15 of the 26 episodes. It's just so pure Rod Serling. So in terms of his philosophy and everything else, it was a series of, as you said, it was a Lloyd Bridges stars, and it was the only time that Rod Serling got to write for a continuing character. It's another thing that makes it unusual. Lloyd Bridges stars as William Colton. He's a Civil War veteran who's just trying to make sense of what he just went through. He resigns his commission in the Army, in the Union Army, afterward when he could have gotten a promotion. He could have, been set for life and everything, and he just says, I gotta go west. I'm just gonna go west. He says, I'm gonna get the cannon smoke out of my eyes. I'm gonna get the noise, the ringing out of my ears, and I'm just gonna see what's out there. And it was called an existential Western. It was called the thinking man's Western. But the interesting thing that you'll find when you actually watch the show is you hear those descriptions, and you'll start to think that this was just a ponderous, slow-moving, kind of talky, preachy show. And you watch the first 6 episodes of the show, and there's lots of action. There's lots of, there's gunfights, there's duels, there's fistfights, there's lots of action in the show. So I think that was kind of a misnomer. But it's a terrific show. I put a couple of the episodes of The Loner up there with anything that Rod Serling ever wrote. I mean, I really think it's that strong. He got to use the Western to address social issues, even though he said he wasn't necessarily going to do that. Of course, he had to do that. He would always do that. And he got to use social issues in The Loner the same way he did in the Twilight Zone.
Right. Let's hear a small clip of a little fight that he does or does not have on The Loner.
You kill him?
You might say, in a manner of speaking, yeah, I guess I did kill him.
You must be pretty fast, mister. Maybe you and me got business together now.
You and I don't have any business together. You understand? No business at all. Now, right out.
It's kind of hard on the radio to see what's going on there, but the bottom line is a young kid coming along trying to challenge the KG veteran, if you will, in The Loner, and trying to have a duel with him, which was the machismo thing to do back then, and represent that on television. And that's was, instead of going for that, the actual opposite occurred, where Lloyd Bridges' character walks right to face to this young man and says, listen, we got no problem, get out. Why did he do that? What's that all about?
It's that is from the very first episode called An Echo of Bugles, which is probably my favorite, actually, of all of them. I mean, there are a couple others that are certainly equally as good, but I really loved that first episode, An Echo of Bugles. And yes, the episode starts, or at least that confrontation begins in a saloon where this kid is disrespecting the Confederate flag. And again, this is William Colton is a Union soldier who just fought and killed the Confederacy, and William Colton stands up for the Confederate flag and says, too many good men died for that flag to let you, a young brat like you, disrespect it. And it's not just the flag, but he was also disrespecting a Confederate soldier, a Confederate veteran who was basically disabled. And Lloyd Bridges smacks this kid down literally, and that's a great moment. And of course, the kid comes back and says, we're going to duel. And Lloyd Bridges, William Colton, does everything he can to avoid the duel. He does not want violence. He does not want to come to that. He does not want to kill. He does not want to kill anybody. And that was Rod Serling. Rod Serling was, violence was the absolute last resort, and maybe not even the last resort. He just did not like violence, period. And so the Lloyd Bridges character actually apologizes to this kid. I mean, he does everything he can to avoid the duel. He says, "Listen, if you want me to apologize, fine. I'll just go right out. And of course, that does not happen. And they do duel at the end of it. It's
which is
unavoidable.
Completely different from what we have seen in the past on many westerns. And later on, we saw that. I think you'd see with Clint Eastwood's movie and others where this tact was taken and looked to. It was just something different. I think it's very cool to see Rod Serling doing what he did with new vibrancy in a brand new theater. Let's just move along a little bit. Unfortunately, to move along, but take a look at that. You can get some on YouTube too, a little clip here and there. But like I said, it's released. It's The Loner, and what a great show that is. A lot of fun. Let's take and it's not just fun. As with Rod Serling, there's a message in many of the episodes as well, and that I find important as well. Let's do a little bit about Billy Mooney when he was in the Twilight Zone.
You're a bad man. You're a very bad man.
You think that? Go ahead, Anthony. I'm a very bad man. Keep thinking that. Somebody sneak up behind him. Somebody end this now while he's thinking about me.
There we go. And just a reminder of one of the episodes that he was in. And he was also in the Twilight Zone movie. They translated it, at least that episode, to a little boy that has all these powers and what could possibly happen when you're living a boy's life. He's going to be appearing at the SERLING FEST October 5th, the Saturday, and by Skype, but that still he's going to have a presence there, I guess, for an hour or so, answering questions of the audience, of the host. Yes. How's it going to work?
We'll have him for an hour, and the plan is to do a formal interview for probably a half an hour, and then open it up to the floor for questions for the other half hour. That's
tremendous. Now, you were on Coast to Coast, I guess about 2 years ago now, year and a half.
Wow, yeah, it's been about that long.
Yeah, and Billy Mooney called in. George Neary, I think it was the host, right? At the time, had to pull the string or two or announce that you were going to be on, and Billy Mooney came on. It was a quick little hello and goodbye, and he sort of ignored you, or not really, but he wanted to present what he wanted to present, and he was very interesting.
No, he said hello, and he called me a very bad man.
Right.
So that was enough for me. I was very happy about that. From all accounts, Bill Mooney is a real good guy, and so we're looking forward to having.
So you'll have to stand up and say, "I was the guy that was the most recent bad man."
I'll remind him of that. Yeah,
but that should be a lot of fun. Again, it's in Binghamton, so it's a ride, but it's well worth it. And I've done these conventions, and you make a weekend of it, man. Go get your buddies, get your family, spend the night, and enjoy it and soak it in.
Particularly this event, 3 days. And if in case listeners don't know, I mean the reason for Binghamton was Rod Serling's hometown, so there's a very big Rod Serling presence in Binghamton. There's still the carousel that Rod Serling rode in Recreation Park is still there. That inspired Walking Distance, my favorite Twilight Zone episode. Yeah, that's still there. There's a marker in the bandstand saying Rod Serling, creator of the Twilight Zone Walking Distance. There's a historical marker outside of his high school saying class of 1943. Do I have the number right? I'm not sure if I have the number that date right. Okay. But Rod Serling, playwright, award-winning playwright. There's all sorts of markers and memories there. His boyhood home is there, so we'll be seeing all of that.
All right, we'll be back right at this. Everything Old is New again, and continue to look for information about that on rodserling.com. We'll be right back.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hey, You want to see something really scary?
You bet.
Okay, this is really, really scary now.
I trust you.
Okay, pull the car over.
Pull the car over?
Ooh. You want to see it?
Well, show me while I'm driving.
No, I can't. I can't tell you about it. It's only take a couple of seconds.
All right, 2 seconds, okay?
Okay.
What is it?
Just pull it over.
Okay.
I'll show you.
All right.
Are you ready?
Okay, go ahead. What are you doing?
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. That's a clip from the 1983 Twilight Zone movie with Dan Aykroyd there and Albert Brooks. Dan Aykroyd, a fellow Coast to Coast alum, with my guest, Nicholas Parisi, the author of Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination, will be attending and speaking at SERLING FEST 2019, October 4, 5, 6 in Binghamton. Get to rodserling.com for information. Dimensions of Imagination on Facebook for more info, and Amazon.com for this book. It's really well worth it because you could get a good peek not just into the Twilight Zone, but all of what Rod Serling did and what made him work. And he's a contemporary person even to this day. If you heard our last section about Westerns and about the Confederate flag and respecting the people that passed, believing that was the way to go in their life and so forth. So he has contemporary messages to this day, importance of family, and it just goes on and on. Now, let's talk about the movies a little bit here. He was involved, believe it or not, if you don't remember this, we spoke about this previously, and it is detailed in this great book, Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination. The Planet of the Apes. He also created Requiem for a Heavyweight, and we spoke about those two at length in our prior shows. Again, you can find those on everythingoldisnewagain.biz or YouTube. Just pull up our YouTube channel, which is back. It had been hijacked, and we're putting all these episodes back on. That's a long story, but it's just look on YouTube and a search for Everything Old is New Again radio show. You'll see that, and look for the show 253 and 54. Anyway, with respect to the Twilight Zone, the movie that was produced in 83 was not really, what would you say, original idea, in that, from what I read in your book, in 1961, Rod Serling had the idea to create a trilogy type of movie in color on the big screen. And at page 289 of your book, he says, I have in mind 3 exceptionally good storylines that would make a walloping good motion picture, when he was trying to sell this idea while the Twilight Zone was still on the air. And so I would just ask you, do you know, and what were some of those 3 ideas?
Yeah, it's interesting because, yes, Rod Serling had this idea for a Twilight Zone movie pretty much. I mean, within like a season of the show being on the air, he already had this idea that I'd like to do a movie. And he was so ahead of his time on this particular idea, because television show was making the jump to movies, feature films at the time. I researched, I couldn't find one really that had done it. So he was ahead of his time. And he even said in one of the letters to his agent, says, I believe that using the name Twilight Zone on a feature film would be an almost guarantee of box office success. Again, that was completely ahead of his time on that idea, because at the time television was still the ugly stepchild of motion pictures. It just wasn't seen as the equivalent. So he really tried over and over again to try to get a Twilight Zone feature film made, and the stories he had in mind kind of vary. It's kind of, you almost have to insinuate what they were from other things that he was doing at the time and everything. The stories that he had in mind, most of them have kind of showed up in other ways by this point. One was a story about it ended up being a short story called An Odyssey, or whatever you'd call it, concerning baseball, and it was about a stadium vendor who has kind of these Walter Mitty-esque fantasies about being a baseball player, who is just fantasizing about being a baseball player. So that was one of them, and it ended up being a short story that was published later on. Another one was a story that ended up being produced as an episode of the 1989 Twilight Zone, or 89 Twilight Zone by J. Michael Straczynski. Actually adapted it, called Our Selena is Dying, and it was a real gothic horror kind of story about an old woman who stays, actually she's an old woman who stays young by draining the youth from her family, from the people around her, and she keeps regenerating herself. It was a pretty good story, not a great Twilight Zone episode as it was produced. That was another one. Another story that he wanted to do was The Theater, which was an outline he'd written, and it ended up being an episode of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Lost Classics in 1994. Richard Matheson actually adapted the outline into an episode of that show about a woman who goes into a movie theater and sees her life being replayed on the screen, and eventually it starts telling what's going to happen in her life on the screen, and a very Twilight Zone-esque idea, So those three stories basically did end up being produced in some way, shape, or fashion.
Now, do you think that he was doing that because he wanted an outlet that didn't have the... I guess censorship is kind of a heavy word for it, but he did have to answer to others on the Twilight Zone when he was writing stories and or other things that he wrote. He always seemed, in a lot of the interviews, speak about, I got to answer to the sponsors or the powers that be, and they wanted to change this. If you want to be a television writer, you got to realize that your story is going to be changed, maybe not for the better, but you got to go with it to get it published and so forth. So he's always fighting that, and at some point in one interview he said, I'm just exhausted, I'm tired of fighting this. I mean, maybe this is the seeds of his answer to that.
Well, the Twilight Zone certainly was. Those fights really were primarily before the Twilight Zone. Luckily, in the Twilight Zone, he really did have creative control over just about everything. And yes, he did have some, back and forth with the sponsors about certain things on the Twilight Zone, but nothing really major, nothing that really got under his skin. So developing a Twilight Zone feature film was really more about Rod Serling breaking into feature films. He had a couple of feature films done by that point, but he really wanted to break into feature films and be a successful screenwriter. And this was one that he just thought was a great idea. He said, "Yeah, listen, I got a successful TV show, and again, it wasn't a huge hit, but it was certainly popular enough. Imagine what it could do on the big screen. I think it could be a box office hit, and that's really what this was all about."
Right. And now let's talk about that movie for a moment, the Twilight Zone movie itself from '83. If I remember, there was one original story and two they redid. Is that correct?
Three, actually. One original and three remakes.
Oh, three remakes, right. Yeah. Okay. And the Kick the Can was one I remember, and the one with Billy Mooney was one. I forget the third one.
This was Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
Right, that's right. Now, that one I thought was great. I thought Lithgow did a great job, and the directing I thought was a great job on that one.
I think that's clearly the best of the bunch.
Okay, so I'm on the right track. And Kick the Can was okay, and the Billy Mooney one I didn't think was all that successful. It wasn't Billy Mooney. I keep saying that.
He did have a cameo in it, though, actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
What's it called? It's a Good Life?
It's called It's a Good Life, right? Yes.
When that came out, I was so excited, and I wasn't disappointed, but I was in that I wanted original episodes, and that's a risk because I had known the Twilight Zone so well. But if we really think about it and put it in perspective, it was basically 25 years after those episodes had been aired. Television was different at the time. You didn't have the internet, so maybe people didn't originally see those three episodes. I don't know. But how was it received by the fandom or even the Serling family?
It wasn't received particularly well. I know the family doesn't particularly like it. Yeah. I mean, they did approve it, obviously, and it must be said that the Vic Morrow incident, the tragedy, really cast a pall over the entire production, the entire movie. If anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, before the movie was released, when they were filming the first episode of it, Vic Morrow and two children were killed during the filming in a helicopter accident, and it was a big deal in terms of, John Landis, the producer and director, was brought to trial, and a couple of other people for wrongful death and all sorts of other things. They were eventually acquitted of almost all of the serious charges, but it really cast a pall over the whole movie. And I think Steven Spielberg, to all accounts, really kind of lost his heart before he even started his episode, and he kind of was just going with them along with the motions kind of when he did his episode. So
because of that,
of that, yeah. So and after it was, it wasn't even released on DVD for a while, for a long while, because the studio was just really had a bad, they had a bad taste in their mouths about it. So, but having said all that, I was 12 years old when it came out, I think, and I liked it when I first saw it as a 12-year-old. I thought it was good. I liked that clip that you played of the intro with Dan Aykroyd and Bill, who's the
Albert Brooks.
Albert Brooks.
Right.
Some people don't like that intro and the ending, that the little nod to it at the end, I liked that a lot then, and I still do. I mean, it's more Night Gallery-esque than Twilight Zone, but I don't really care. I mean, I just thought it worked. I thought that was good. And the first episode, the John Landis one, is the one original one, and ironically, I think that's the most Serling-esque of the whole bunch of them. It's about a bigot who gets his comeuppance, in the Twilight Zone-esque fashion, and that was the most Serling-esque of the bunch. The other 3 episodes, ironically, none of them are Rod Serling stories. The Kick the Can was a George Clayton Johnson story. It's a Good Life. Rod Serling did write the teleplay for the original episode, but it was based on a Jerome Bixby short story, and he was pretty faithful to the short story, so it's really a Jerome Bixby story. And Nightmare at 20,000 Feet was a Richard Matheson story. So somehow they made a Twilight Zone movie with no Rod Serling story in it, and that doesn't make sense.
And who wrote the one with Vic Morrow? Do you remember?
John Landis wrote it, actually.
It was Landis who wrote it, too, because that was it was real good. But we're going to have Nicholas Parisi back next week on Everything Old is New Again. Talk all things Rod Serling, Serling Fest. Go to rodserling.com. Get over to Binghamton, October 4th, 5th, and 6th. Go to Facebook, Dimensions of Imagination. Take a look at what's going on there. Lots of exploration about Rod Serling. rodserling.com. And, of course, Everything Old is New Again. We'll be back next week to talk all things and more things Rod Serling on Everything Old is New Again.
Everything Old is New Again is sponsored by the law office of Douglas Viviani. Douglas Viviani has been providing quality legal service for over 26 years. We're a general practice firm and can handle any legal matter you may have for a reasonable fee. If you're involved in a car accident, starting a business, planning your estate, or need a criminal attorney, please call 631-681-1910 or email us at vivianilaw@aol.com for a free consultation. Get the justice you deserve. Contact the law office of Douglas Viviani at vivianilaw@aol.com.
You've been listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's pop culture entertainment talk show. Find us on the web at everythingoldisnewagain.biz. That's .biz.
See you next week. Same bat time, same bat station.